Hey guys, tonight, as you settle in and let your thoughts begin to quiet, we'll drift back in time to a world of candlelight, call to prayer, and the faint scent of jasmine carried through marble halls. We're going to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, a vast realm of power and beauty, where empires rose and fell behind walls few ever saw. But this isn't the story of sultans or warriors. It's the story of the women who lived within those walls, who waited, worked, and dreamed in the shadow of greatness. Their lives were quiet, yet full of hidden power. Their names forgotten, yet their influence stretched across centuries. Before we begin, if you enjoy drifting through history with us, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It really helps others find the channel. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We love seeing how far this little corner of the past can reach. Now, take a deep breath. Let your body grow still and imagine yourself in another life, in a sun-warmed home of carved stone, somewhere deep within the Ottoman world, where another woman's day is just beginning. Imagine the first light of morning filtering through a lattice window. The air is cool, tinged with the scent of clay and the faint sweetness of rosewater left from the night before. Somewhere outside, the call to prayer echoes across narrow streets, its rhythm steady, timeless, familiar. A woman stirs quietly in the dim room. She has already been awake for some time, long before the city has truly opened its eyes. There are embers to stir back to life, dough to knead, and children to rouse gently from their mats. For most women of the Ottoman Empire, the day began like this, with duty, not choice. There was always work, always movement, yet so little of it belonged to them. The rhythm of life was written by others, husbands, fathers, brothers, or masters. And yet, within that quiet repetition, you could find small acts of defiance, the kind that never made it into history books. The way she folded the bread a certain way, the way she saved a copper coin in the lining of her shawl, or the way she whispered stories to her daughters at night. Stories where women did the saving, not the waiting. The weight of marriage and family marriage was not a question of romance for most. It was a contract, an arrangement, one that balanced property, honour and reputation. Girls might be promised at 12, wed by 14 or 15, and by 20 already mothers several times over. Dowries were negotiated, families haggling not for affection but for survival. A woman's worth was measured in linens, gold coins, and the promise that she would be obedient. Her husband's household became her entire world, a place she might rarely leave without permission. Even in the bustling cities of Bursa, Edirne, or Istanbul, a woman's steps were confined to the inner courtyard, the marketplace, or perhaps, once in a great while, a visit to the bathhouse, the hammam, the one place where she could breathe freely. In the hammam, the air shimmered with steam and laughter. Here, women were allowed to exist outside of men's eyes. They traded gossip, sang softly, scrubbed away the weight of expectation. In those moments, the hammam was a world of its own, a temporary sanctuary carved out of stone and steam. Labour that never ended. The idea of work for Ottoman women extended far beyond what was seen. Inside the home, every surface carried the trace of their hands. Bread baked in clay ovens, wool spun into yarn, silk embroidered into delicate patterns that would never bear their names. In villages, women worked in fields alongside men, planting, harvesting, tending animals, their backs bent under baskets of olives or grain. In cities, poorer women took jobs as laundresses, midwives, or sellers of herbs and perfume. Even within the imperial capital, in the shadow of domes and minarets, there were hundreds of women whose lives were invisible. Slaves, servants, concubines, moving quietly through corridors, their lives dictated by the will of others. But every piece of fabric sewn, every child fed, every courtyard swept clean, was an act of quiet continuation, a way of keeping the world in motion. Restrictions and small freedoms. Women were expected to live within the haremlik, the private domestic sphere. Men occupied the salamlik, the public world of business and politics. Walls and curtains divided these spaces, symbolically separating honour from exposure. For many, it meant isolation. A woman might spend her entire life between the same set of courtyards, seeing the same faces, hearing the same voices, watching the same sky framed by carved lattice windows. But in the quiet corners of those homes they found ways to leave marks of themselves. They embroidered initials in the hems of linens, planted herbs that would bloom each spring, and told stories, fairy tales, legends, parables, that carried traces of their humour, their fears, their dreams. Education for girls varied by class. In wealthier families, some learned to read the Quran, to write poetry, to play instruments. Others learned through listening, memorising the rhythms of prayer, the recipes of ancestors, the subtle art of endurance. Even illiteracy did not silence them. Women composed folk songs, lullabies and oral poems that echoed across generations. In their words we find glimpses of a wit and wisdom that the written histories ignored. The silent strength. To live as a woman in the Ottoman Empire was to exist within boundaries, but also to find life within them. Many bore the weight of expectation quietly, raising sons who would have more freedom than they ever did, but they also shaped those sons' hearts, instilling patience, mercy and gentleness, virtues that would ripple far beyond their courtyards. They were not powerless, only unseen. Their world was narrow, but within it they built empires of their own, in the rhythms of the kitchen, in the stories whispered before sleep, in the wisdom passed through hands rather than ink. Imagine one such woman now, her hands rough from work, her eyes steady, her world small but complete. She does not know that centuries from now someone will wonder what her life was like. She only knows the warmth of the oven, the laughter of her children, and the endless familiar call of the city beyond her walls. Pause, gentle fade of ambient sound. And so, behind the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, the battles, the sultans, the glittering palaces, there existed another empire built by women whose names we may never know. An empire of quiet endurance, woven through the fabric of daily life. Now, as we leave these unseen courtyards behind, let's turn our gaze toward a woman who refused to remain invisible. A woman who stepped out from behind the lattices and claimed power that few could imagine. This is the story of Kösem Sultan, the concubine who became one of the most powerful figures in Ottoman history. Now imagine another woman, not born into the empire but brought into it, not by choice, but by circumstance. She was born far from Istanbul, some say, on a small island in the Aegean. Others claim among the green hills of Greece. Her name was Anastasia then, a name that would soon be forgotten, replaced by one that would echo through the centuries, Kösem Sultan. She arrived at the palace as so many others did, a young girl sold into the vast, intricate machinery of empire. She might have been 16, perhaps younger, when the gates of Topkapi Palace closed behind her. To the outside world, this place was the heart of power, a shimmering world of domes, marble and gardens. But for her it was both a cage and a stage. The making of a concubine. Within the palace walls every movement had meaning. Servants glided silently through corridors. Tutors taught languages, poetry and court etiquette. Girls were trained to serve, to sing, to charm. They were told to be graceful, silent, observant, to watch carefully, but reveal nothing. It was a world ruled by hierarchy and subtlety, where a glance could mean favour, and a word could mean ruin. Some women remained invisible all their lives. Others learned to navigate the tides of attention, to wait for the right moment, to speak softly but decisively. Kösem was one of these women. She was clever, patient and observant. She learned the customs of the court, the moods of her masters, and the rhythm of the palace itself. And when the young Sultan Ahmed I noticed her, she did not simply smile. She adapted. She listened, understood, and mirrored what he admired. In a world where women were often spoken for, she found ways to speak quietly for herself. From concubine to power, Ahmed was young, intelligent, and idealistic. A ruler who built the magnificent Blue Mosque, but who also faced the weight of wars and rebellion. In him, Kusum saw more than a husband. She saw a mind she could influence, a partner in strategy. Over time, she became his most trusted companion. She bore him several sons, each one a possible heir, each one in the delicate balance of Ottoman succession, a potential risk and promise. When Ahmed died suddenly in 1617, Kösem's position should have ended. Tradition dictated that with the Sultan's death, his concubines were removed from court, sent away to the old palace, a quiet exile filled with memories and whispers. But Kösem's story was different. She had woven herself too deeply into the threads of power. Through diplomacy, timing, and quiet alliances, she remained connected to the palace, waiting, watching, as new sultans rose and fell. Years passed, and when her own son Murat IV ascended the throne, Kösem returned, not as a concubine, but as the Valide Sultan, the mother of the Sultan. And in the Ottoman court, the Valide Sultan wielded immense power. Behind the gilded doors of the Harem, Kösem governed the empire's inner world. She arranged marriages, managed estates, and even influenced state appointments. The Sultan might hold the throne, but his mother often held the empire's pulse. For decades, she balanced politics and survival with remarkable precision. She was not loud nor cruel, but calculating, a strategist who understood that in silence there was strength. Ministers, generals and ambassadors all learned to respect the quiet authority of the Valide Sultan. She held audiences behind curtains, her words carried by eunuchs, her decisions shaping wars, treaties and dynasties, the shadow of power. But power in the Ottoman palace was always fragile, a flame that could be extinguished in a single night. When her son Murat died, Kösem again became the regent, this time for her young grandson, Mehmet IV. Her influence stretched across decades, and with it came resentment. New factions emerged. The court shifted around her, and the whispers began that she was too powerful, too ambitious, that her time had passed. History tells us little of her final moments, only that, in the end, she was betrayed within the same palace that had made her powerful, strangled by silk cords, a death reserved for those of royal blood. But even in that quiet, tragic end, her legacy endured, the enduring echo. Today, Kösem Sultan's name is still spoken, not as a warning, but as a testament to a woman who mastered the impossible world she was born into. From captive to queen mother, from servant to regent, her journey stretched across decades of empire, wars, births and betrayals. In her silence, there was calculation. In her obedience, there was strategy. In her love, there was survival. As you imagine her now, walking through the marble halls of Topkapi at dusk, the soft echo of her slippers on stone, a faint scent of rosewater lingering in the air, remember that history often hides its most powerful figures behind veils and whispers. Kösem's story is one of those whispers, a reminder that power can take many forms, and that even in the most confined spaces, a woman can move the world. Soft music returns, a slow oud melody fading into silence. And now, from the shadows of politics and the quiet cunning of the palace, we'll move into a softer realm, one filled with secrets, scents and memory, hidden letters, delicate bottles of perfume, and the traces of women's lives that time tried to erase. The past often leaves behind traces too faint to speak, yet somehow still alive. Letters pressed into yellowed paper, a bottle of perfume sealed for centuries, a scrap of embroidered fabric hidden in a drawer. These small things are what remain of Ottoman women's private worlds, the lives that unfolded quietly behind walls, away from the sound of politics and war. In Istanbul, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of this silence. Delicate glass bottles once filled with rose oil, tiny jars of musk and amber, a child's bracelet, a comb carved from bone. To touch them, even through gloves and dust, is to feel the echo of someone's morning routine, someone's breath, someone's world that existed and disappeared. In old letters written in Ottoman Turkish, ink faded almost to nothing, you find a different kind of history. Women wrote to husbands at war, to sisters in distant provinces, to friends they might never see again. The words are gentle, filled with longing, small domestic concerns, and sometimes quiet poetry. "I have sent you almonds," one wife wrote to her husband. "Do not forget to eat." The nights are cold. Another letter from a mother reads, "Your son took his first steps. May Allah guide his feet to safety." There are no grand declarations, only traces of a life lived in the rhythm of care and waiting. In the palace, perfumes held special meaning. Each scent told a story. The deep warmth of amber for confidence, the cool sharpness of jasmine for calm, the softness of rose for remembrance. A woman might wear different scents each day, layered so subtly that her presence lingered even after she had passed through a room. To wear perfume was not only a matter of beauty, it was a form of memory, a way to claim space in a world that constantly erased you. In quiet corners of Ottoman homes, small wooden boxes were filled with secrets, dried flowers, folded notes, charms to ward off envy, and sometimes strands of hair wrapped in silk. These things were never meant for history books. They were meant for comfort, for luck, for love. Objects that carried whispers through time. Travellers who visited Ottoman cities often wrote about the silence of women's quarters. They saw latticed windows and thought only of confinement. But within those walls there were other kinds of freedom. Freedom to write letters no man would ever read, to mix scents no one else could name, to sing songs in voices meant only for each other. In the hum of embroidery and the soft clink of jewellery, there was a rhythm of resistance. Not the loud kind that breaks chains, but the quiet kind that endures them. The kind that says, "I am still here." Historians sometimes describe this as the invisible half of empire. But to imagine their world through their own eyes is to realise that invisibility is a matter of perspective. They were not invisible to each other. Their friendships, their humour, their small kindnesses. These were the threads that held the empire together just as surely as armies or trade routes did. Imagine one woman sitting by the window at dusk, a thin sheet of paper in front of her, a bottle of ink beside a bowl of rose petals. Outside, the call to prayer rolls through the city. Inside, she writes a single line and pauses to watch the ink spread across the paper. She will fold it carefully, seal it with a drop of wax, and trust that somehow her words will reach the one she misses. Centuries later, we find her letter in a chest, the paper brittle, the edges darkened. Her perfume long gone, her name forgotten, but her handwriting, steady, graceful, remains. It is a soft reminder that even the most silent lives can leave their mark. And from these faint traces of ordinary women, their letters, their scents, their whispers, we turn now to a very different world. A world of latticed pavilions and silk carpets, of jewelled robes and endless leisure. A world where privilege was its own kind of confinement. Let's drift now into the lives of the elite, the women who lived in luxury behind the lattices of empire. Behind the high marble walls of Topkapi Palace, life followed a slower rhythm. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and jasmine, and the courtyards shimmered in the soft reflection of tiled fountains. It was a world apart, a world of silk, of order, of quiet. Here, the women of the imperial family lived lives shaped by beauty and restraint. They woke to the sound of footsteps echoing through polished halls, the rustle of curtains, the whisper of attendants preparing tea. Sunlight filtered through lattice screens, turning dust into gold. Everything was calm, deliberate, as if time itself moved differently here. Servants moved soundlessly, their feet wrapped in soft slippers. Trays of sweet sherbet and figs were brought in, followed by delicate cups of coffee, thick, fragrant, and dark as ink. The day began not with labour, but with ritual. The elite women of the empire were surrounded by comfort, but their freedom was measured in steps and glances. They could walk through gardens scented with cypress and orange blossoms, but only within the palace grounds. They could wear jewels brighter than the stars, yet not be seen by the world beyond. Their beauty was both celebrated and guarded, a possession of the dynasty, a reflection of the empire's refinement. Every fold of silk, every jewel, every embroidered slipper was part of a language that spoke of rank, modesty, and control. In their wardrobes hung robes of fine Bursa silk, dyed with indigo and pomegranate, gauzy veils, velvet caftans, belts of gold filigree. When they walked, the fabric swayed softly, the faint sound of silver thread brushing against marble. Their hair was scented with rose and amber, their fingers stained faintly with henna. Every gesture was graceful, deliberate, as though the body itself was a poem. Yet even in this splendour there was still solitude. Conversations were often hushed. Letters were read and reread in the dim light. A fountain murmured endlessly in the courtyard, the same sound day after day. Outside, the empire stretched across continents, but inside, the hours drifted like mist. The harem was not a single room, but a maze of chambers and gardens, each reserved for women of different ranks: wives, daughters, attendants, and servants. It was a city within the city, ruled not by men, but by protocol and quiet hierarchy. Some women found ways to fill their days with creation. They painted delicate patterns on tiles, composed verses in secret notebooks, or embroidered gifts for visiting dignitaries. Music filled the corridors, the pluck of the oud, the soft rhythm of a drum. These moments of beauty were both pastime and expression, small rebellions against monotony. There were festivals too. On holy days or royal weddings, the palace came alive with colour and sound. Lanterns glowed from every window. Perfume drifted through the gardens. The women watched from behind lattices as fireworks bloomed above the Bosphorus. Even celebration came from a distance. Beautiful, but never fully theirs. In the late evenings, when the palace quieted, they gathered in small groups, their laughter subdued, their stories soft. They spoke of dreams, of distant lands, of freedom imagined but never touched. And when the moonlight spilled across the tiles, they sat by the windows, watching the city sleep. Outside, ships creaked on the water, and the faint cry of a night bird echoed from the hills. Inside, everything was still, a stillness that could feel like peace, or like waiting. For these women, luxury was not freedom. It was a silken veil drawn over a golden cage. But within that cage they created their own small eternities, in laughter, in kindness, in shared memory. They survived the empire's slow turning with grace that went unseen, but not unfelt. Now, as you imagine the palace resting under a deep blue sky, its towers quiet, its gardens heavy with night air, the city of Istanbul hums softly beyond its walls. The empire that once ruled continents is long gone, but the echoes of its people, its women, remain, woven through its streets and stones. They are in the scent of rosewater that still drifts through the bazaars, in the lullabies still sung in the language they spoke, in the patterns carved into tile and fabric, the quiet signatures of hands that history forgot. So as you drift further into rest, imagine that world gently fading into the distance, a world of light and shadow, of strength and silence. The rhythm of their lives slows, the sound of water returns, and you find yourself at peace, floating somewhere between memory and dream.